Hello and welcome to this episode of the Your Holistic Earth podcast. My name is Kimberly Carson Richards and I am your host today. I am so excited. On this episode, I get to have a conversation with Rae-ann Wood-Schatz. But first, let me tell you about this podcast. So Your Holistic Earth podcast is about bridging and connecting you to local and national experts in the field of holistic wellness, medicine and wellness. And on each episode and podcast, I get the honor and pleasure of interviewing experts that are going to help you have a healthier and increased sense of well-being in life. So Rae-ann Wood-Schatz would be described or self-described as a woman who lives every day with the desire and commitment to make a difference in the life of whoever she connects with on that given day, in that given moment. I love that. Her passion for people comes from a deep-seated belief that we are all infinitely capable of doing better and being better, and that sometimes all we lack is willingness. The willingness to get out of our own way, know that story, to shed the old stories and the old beliefs that keep us stuck in patterns of behavior and thinking that leads to less than stellar results. So Rae-ann, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. So let's just dig right in. I would love for you to share, with the viewers today, like, what do you do and how do you help people? Like, let's just go right in. I love meaty questions. Just like, tell them all about you.
Well, so telling people about me isn't always easy because my journey has been just that, a journey, and I have picked up so many things and pieces along the way. So it started with a psych degree and working in crisis programs. I worked inside of women's shelters. I worked in rape crisis centers. I spent some time building a program that's still in existence that offered peer support for women post-violence. And as I often tell people, had hit my early 30s and thought I'd done everything right. So got the degree, got the career, got the husband, got the kids, got all the stuff, and then found myself burning out and realizing that it felt really young to be burnt out at 30 something. And so I made the decision to take a look at how I might pivot, knowing that I had 30 plus more years to go before retirement was going to be an option. I didn't have the resources to retire at 30. Had that been an option, maybe I would have, I don't know. And I got introduced to a personal development program that so I lived in Calgary at the time. The company then was called Personal Best Seminars, and I'd had some people in my life that had gone through it and said that it was pivotal for them. And so I enrolled in that process and went looking to find me and to find a new pathway, and found a program and a company that I decided I'd like to do this. So I'm here for me, and then realized that I watched people transform. I transformed and I watched other people transform in a very small window of time, and thought if it has this much influence and impact compared to what I've been used to as a crisis worker, I want to do this. I want to bring this to the world. And so it was a significant pivot also from nonprofit, and having spent my life in the nonprofit sector to, I bought a license to teach those programs in Edmonton and brought my family, moved my life, moved my career, moved my everything, left my relationship that hadn't been healthy and functional for quite some time, and launched a business. And that business is bringing personal development to people that are ready to, you don't have to be burnt out necessarily. You just need to be ready to do some things differently and understand why you do things the way you do them. And so that was the launch point. And I've been at it since 2001. And more recently, of course, with COVID, starting to even look at doing some other things even different beyond that, looking at doing some more online process and things like that. So the journey started with being in service to people. It's still that, and will continue to be that. The ways in which I've done that has really shifted over the years.
Yeah, I love that. And I know you mentioned the word impact. I mean, and for my own business, Profitable Impact Academy, that's such a, really resonates. And it's funny because I had heard your name kind of like in the circles of Edmonton before I ever met you for the first time. And that was the one thing people always talked about, was taking your programs and the impact it made on their life. in a really short amount of time, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's really cool that you are making a difference for a lot of people. And I love that. One of the things I love about you. So now I know in this conversation, you had mentioned, earlier that you kind of wanted to have a conversation about PTSD, and, there's so much going on in the world right now with
Mhm.
global events and how that, can really impact the average person, talking about
Mhm.
impact, and how do they access, appropriate supports for that so that they're not struggling, right?
Mhm.
Talking about like that feeling of something's not quite right. So I would love to hear like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and so talking about pivots, so one of the things that had already started pre-COVID was one of the participants in my process had come to me with a dream, an idea, a vision. Her husband is a captain of the Edmonton Fire Department. It was a time when Edmonton Fire had had a number of suicides consecutive, like in a short window of time. And she talked about her experience of being a spouse to a first responder and a friend to many first responders' spouses. So she was fairly involved in their peer support process. And she had said, it's one of those things that PTSD used to be exclusively in the domain for the most part of first responders, and that more and more we're seeing people, more regular people not having operational stress injury, which would be as a result of a job. So people in military, people that are first responders, or people that have been, traumatized through their work experience, but through life. And that more and more people are being diagnosed, and more people are feeling the impact of PTSD. And so she asked about, a way for us to be able to work together to find a different or better response, because she also felt like, having been in it herself as a survivor, watching her husband and many people around her in a similar scenario and situation, is that the current approach is moderate and in its effect, and that most people, or many people, are just doing their best to kind of keep their head above water or breathe underwater sometimes with it, that there's no real recovery. We've even used the word disorder, which means that somehow something is broken. And so we have started a process together collectively to look at doing a wellness program, maybe even a physical location that will bring more of a holistic, the whole idea of holistic earth has been a beautiful example of help people navigate those many choices, those many places. I know I need support, but where do I start? Who do I see? Where do I go? What's the best way? And so what we want to create is a place where people can just come to one place, and they can see the acupuncturist, they can see the massage therapist, they can go and have a float in a sensory deprivation tank, they can do group meditation, they can do yoga, trauma yoga, they can do, and then at some point in their process, so we're designing it and fleshing it out as a 12-month process, is then people can come and do our process as well. And it's grounded in the idea that, especially with COVID, I think, is that it's going to go up. Like, if it isn't already a problem, which most of us know it is that it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. And that more and more people are going to experience it as, and the symptoms of PTSD, as many people can identify, is that, back in the day, if we go to what people understood PSD to be, would be like shell shock or battle fatigue or combat stress reaction, in the military sort of context, or in the context of people that work. But it's in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it's been in there since the 80s. And they just keep adding more symptoms to what that is. And then, of course, there's morbidity that goes with that as well, which is, people that don't get the support, then they can suffer from depression or anxiety or substance use disorders, or, it just goes up and up and up. And so the hope is that we can find a way to be able to support people in navigating those systems, and believing and having some hope that there actually can be recovery from post-traumatic stress, instead of just coping with post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting because, my next question was going to be, what do you think are some of the myths or misconceptions people have? And as you're talking, I realized for me, one of them is that, you only get it if you're in the military, right? Like we kind of have that association, but you're right. There are so many other experiences where that could happen. So what would you say are some other misconceptions that people may have about PTSD?
Well, I think sometimes the front end sort of user of programs or people that have been diagnosed is that sometimes and I would call it a myth for them. It's the conditioning around the fact that they do just need to learn how to live with it versus recover. So it is a chronic sort of debilitating condition that comes as a result of a traumatic event. But I think people misunderstand or don't fully understand what could be traumatic for me might not be traumatic for you, and or vice versa. And so you don't ever really totally know often until you're in it, until you're in the middle of the challenges. And so I think, again, if I tie it back to what we're dealing with in terms of this pandemic, is that think about social isolation. Can that create PTSD? I'm a closet introvert, so not for me, because I've actually really enjoyed the reflective time. The more I'm not as busy, things are less intense. So social isolation for me isn't going to be something that triggers what feels like trauma, if that makes sense. But for somebody else, it's significant. We were just, prior to going live, we were having the conversation about economic uncertainty, inside of life and business and all of those pieces. And I have a client today that owns a couple of gyms, and so they've reopened, and he's recognizing how nervous he is and most of the people that work there around how long do we get to be here before a second wave possibly comes, and then can we survive a second wave? What happens if that happens? When that happens, we don't think we can get through it. And so people are dealing with that. And then the virus itself, again, for me, one of those people that most people know me, I've had, 4 colds and the flu once in my entire life. And so I haven't attached significantly to that fear of, this virus could have significant impact on my health and my overall physical well-being, because I have a belief that doesn't support that. And then there are lots of other people that are walking around terrified of other humans, and that fear of, am I safe? Am I not safe? And so all of those things can create an experience of trauma. That trauma is not, so I would say the biggest myth is that trauma is as much about how we perceive and see situations than it is the actual situation itself. And so that either can increase the probability that PTSD will show up, or it can mask and block people from recognizing that they are dealing with trauma, because they wouldn't in their mind say this is a trauma-worthy experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Absolutely. And I'd never really thought about it that way before. So this is really enlightening to me. And you're right. Like it is, especially like I see this, I'm fairly introverted too, but I've seen some of my friends and even like my business partner, Kat, who she's very extroverted, like really struggling after the sustained amount of time of not being around people. And how that, can affect your mental health, right? If it's continuing for a really long time and kind of that struggle. And you're right, the fear of, my husband, I am fortunate to work from home, but my husband has a job that's considered, a crucial service. So he's still having to leave the house. And I remember really early on, like in the first couple of weeks, how fearful he was that he was going to bring it home, right? To the family, and just, and the impact, the sustained impact that took like the toll, like day after day. So, and that absolutely could be very triggering for someone who already has something, right? And then this is layered on. So what would you say would be like, so if someone is watching this and they're like, wow, like I didn't realize that maybe this is something I'm struggling with, or that I may have some symptoms that I just never associated with it being PTSD, and I want to explore this further. What would you recommend that they do as like a first step, like step 1?
Well, step 1 is definitely, I recognize that this might be something I'm dealing with. Step 2 would be holding space for the fact that a response is a quick response is going to be a lot better than a delayed response.
Mm.
The delayed response, of course, creates some of those comorbidities. I don't know why I'm struggling with that word today. Which is the depression piece and those other parts. By the time you've hit that, the climb out is so much more intense. And so I would say, the accessing support from the perspective and point of view of, if you've accessed support, what worked. So it's okay to invite that back into your experience. So whatever that might be, or whomever that might be. And if it's something new or something that people haven't necessarily experienced before, it's the recognition that, Einstein said it best, we often try and solve problems with the mind that created it in the first place. And so it's the recognition that support is critical and crucial, and then the right kind of support. And so that's why I've been so supportive of Deanne's vision for Holistic Earth, because I think it helps people navigate that massive sea of what are the treatments, what are the options, what are the opportunities, what are the healing modalities that maybe aren't necessarily your traditional therapy route, or for many people, pharmaceuticals. And so the ability to the pharmaceutical piece for me, and I'm sometimes a bit controversial about that, is that for me, it's not, and even for my clients, it's not a long-term solution. So I had a client who was 28 years on 4 different medications, and she did her healing work and her recovery work, and she's been off all of them for now coming on 7 years and doing extremely well. So it's that I know I need help, and I know that there may be a variety of different options and opportunities. I need to keep looking and finding those that work for me, and then staying the course until I feel like I'm on the other side and in recovery, not just managing.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I think too, like our brain is incredibly powerful when given the right tools. And our traditional medical system, it's kind of like, okay, you have this symptom, take this pharmaceutical, right, to mask the symptom, but it doesn't really get to the root of what's causing the problem in the first place. And there are so many beautiful modalities now that you can try and see if this is gonna like help you create some improvement. So, and I love the idea when you were talking about, creating a space that will bring them all together, right? Like you were talking about trauma yoga, which is actually really interesting. I've never heard that term. I'm very familiar with yoga, but I've never thought of it, in relation to, treating something like PTSD. So
and there's actually a program for yoga instructors to take that's trauma informed yoga. So then they know how to adapt what they're doing for people that are holding trauma in their bodies and in their minds and in their hearts.
Yeah. It's crazy, right? Like we hold trauma at a cellular level. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. We just like, oh, I'm getting older, I have some aches and pains. It could be something much more deep rooted that you've just been ignoring instead of like dealing with it and tolerate. I talk about this all the time as an entrepreneur. We have incredible levels of tolerating things, just almost ignoring. It's like you feel it, you see it, there's a problem, but you just continue until the problem becomes so big that you can no longer ignore it. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, right, like tune in a little bit and recognize, like, don't don't be so tolerant to the things that aren't working, the things that don't feel good.
And even if you look at the definition of tolerance, it's exactly that. It's tension. So there's an aspect of when I'm tolerating something, I'm tensely just holding it, managing it versus clearing it and moving it. So it's a perfect example.
Okay. So one last question, just to, I love stories. So, I mean, you shared a little bit of your journey and you've done a lot, right? That really makes you an expert in helping others. But what would you say, if you were to think back over your journey, is like one obstacle where you were like, this is the thing that really fueled me to get to where I am? Do you think?
It's a really good question. I think, I often tell the story of my dad used to call me Ann Landers when I was like 7. And so for people that maybe are a little younger or a lot younger, Ann Landers was an advice column in newspapers where people would write in and ask for advice. And and Landers would respond to them in newspapers. I imagine she wasn't a actual real person. There probably were different people for different newspapers responding, but people understood it, Dear Anne kind of thing. And it's funny,
Yes,
my name's
I
Rae-ann.
remember that totally.
And so he used to refer to me as Ann Landers all the time. And I think I realized early on that being in service and supporting other people was going to be an important and significant part of my life and my life experience. And when I hit that point where I felt like I was burning out, is I needed to learn that there are lots of different ways to live on purpose, and that sometimes it's that part around thinking that it's supposed to be one way, and so I'm on that pathway, and then when that pathway no longer serves, is then how to pivot or how to course correct without blowing up the world, without having to completely dismantle everything that any of us have ever worked for. And so it was the revisioning and the ability to be able to do that without feeling like I needed to repurpose, and then straying off course with what I think I'm here to do in the world. And even this piece into PTSD, it kind of feels full circle in that I did a lot of crisis work, and I've stayed away from it for the last 20 years and really did more of elevating people and inspiring people and encouraging people and helping them really level up. And now finding my way back into that space where I feel like I want to be able to support people who are in crisis, and in a very different way than I would have 20 years ago. And so incorporating everything I've picked up along the way, all of the knowledge and the skills and the tools, the teachers, everything that I've learned, and being able to now bring that to be able to support people that maybe are really struggling and have the ability to be able to rejig. So revisioning without having to repurpose was probably the biggest challenge I ever had to meet, because I wasn't sure how to do that, or even, could I do that, or was I going to be like my parents were, which is stuck in a pathway that they walked out till they both got the gold watch, and felt a lot of bitterness and resentment for it in their lives.
Yes. I love it. That's very quotable, by the way. Revision without having to repurpose. That's really beautiful. And I think probably a lot of people feel that way, right? And really resonate with that idea of like pivoting without having to blow it all up.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much. So Rae-ann, if anyone that is watching this, they're like, I must find her, connect with her, I need to know more, what is the best way for people to contact you?
So Rae-ann-Wood-Schatz.com, real simple. It's my whole name.com. And then our other website for the seminar process is Integrity Seminars. So beautiful. We are active on both all social media platforms, and then our websites as well. So my website. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, guys. So if you, I know, just go email her right now. I know someone's watching this and they're like, I need to meet Rae-ann. So Rae-ann, thank you so much for being the guest on today's episode. It has been an absolute pleasure, getting to chat with you and dig in a little bit. We actually had we went kind of deep in a really short amount of time. And I know that for the people that watch this, it's going to be very helpful for them. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise today.
Thanks for having me.
So guys, don't stop watching now. I want you to go click play on the next episode. It has been my absolute honor to be here with you today, and I will catch you on another episode soon. Thanks.